you for joining us for our third national convening here at Union Chapel titled Beyond Dog Whistles, How Anti-Blackness is Destroying Our Democracy and What We Must Do to Resist. The importance of remembering our history and protecting the organizations that honor the history of this nation, African American history, could not be more urgent. I have the honor of leading ASALH, founded in 1915 when segregation was law, and most textbooks ignored Black life completely. Carter G. Woodson created our association to place Black voices at the center of our national story. He launched the Journal of Negro History, which is now the Journal of African American History, in 1916. He started Negro History Week, which is now Black History Month, in 1926. Next year, we're celebrating 100 years of Black history commemorations. Yes, we're excited about that. For more than a century, ASALH branches have preserved local archives. We've trained teachers, and we have insisted that history belongs to all of us. It is we, the people, not they, the people. That work makes our partnership with AAPF especially powerful. And this event could not come at a more critical moment. As we gather here in the historic Union Chapel on Martha's Vineyard, we are joined by viewers and listeners and ASALH members from across the country, including our guests joining us virtually on Zoom and YouTube. Welcome to all of you. I want to ask that while you listen to our conversation, that you reflect and be prepared to share with us what you are inspired to do after you leave here today. Information should not be kept secret. You learn something, you should be telling people what you know. We're going to hear from a few people in the room later in the program, but for those of you joining us virtually, you can find us on social media at AA Policy Forum. If you like the content you hear today, follow us on our social media channels and join our mailing list. We know that there are costs to speaking truth to power. And so we know and understand that stakeholders in racial justice have to play a far more prominent role to keep those conversations going. And throughout this afternoon, we hope you consider actively supporting us by donating to this important work. You will find a donation card on your seat and a link to donate online. I now turn to Kimberlé Crenshaw, the Executive Director at the African American Policy Forum, a professor of law at Columbia and UCLA. She is the scholar who coined the terms critical race theory and intersectionality, and she is a leading advocate for racial justice. Welcome to the podium, Kimberlé Crenshaw.
Good evening, everyone. How are folks feeling today? Yeah, okay, I share that with you. I'm so happy, though, that you've chosen to spend some time with us. This is our 6th year here at Martha's Vineyard. Can I get a sense, how many people have joined us any time in the prior 5 times we've been here? Just a show of hands. And how many of you are new to AAPF? All right, we're moving in the right direction, so thank you so much for joining us. We're going to talk about the state of our democracy today. It's going to be a difficult conversation, but I hope it's a conversation that's going to give you some receipts, because that's what we need right now. We need some receipts. So let's talk about what's happened just in less than a year. So in less than a year, we have witnessed the wholesale destruction of the very principles of equal opportunity, of racial justice, of inclusion. We've seen this being carried out by an authoritarian regime that has taken place in the White House. We've witnessed A regime set ablaze the federal bureaucracy as we know it. We have witnessed American troops invade American cities. We've seen people being disappeared off the streets, torn apart from their families, taken away from their homes without any legal recourse. We have witnessed the passing of the big, brutal bill, which covers tens of millions of low-income Americans, including 4.4 million Black women and nearly 2/3 of all births to Black mothers. And most recently, as you've just heard, we are witnessing attempts by Republican legislators to disenfranchise entire districts and to gerrymander Texas Representative Jasmine Crockett out of her own district. Just think about that for a moment, just gerrymandering her out of her own district. Now, I think we all know that this is a crisis, but I want to talk a little bit about what people are telling us about this crisis. Some people think that this crisis starts and ends with Trump 2.0, and that if we can just hang on for a few more years, things will return back to politics as usual. That's what some of the folks are telling us. Other folks are telling us that we can afford to ignore and not speak to the anti-Blackness that is fueling so much of this slide. We see it playing out in front of our very eyes. And some people are telling us that it's premature or even alarmist to bemoan this moment as a descent into fascism. They tell us fascism is what happens over there. It's not what is happening here in this country. Here I want to quote the great Langston Hughes, who said, "We Negroes in America do not have to be told what fascism is. We know it. We have lived it." In other words, we Black folks here in the US know something about the tyranny that is unfolding in front of our very eyes. And we also know that we can't begin to grapple with its threat to our democracy without grappling with its threat to us. So the road to authoritarianism in the United States was in the past and continues in this present moment to be paved in anti-Blackness. We need to be able to name that. That's why I said this is going to be an evening full of receipts. But here's the problem. Those who would destroy our democracy understand the connections between their project and anti-Blackness better than we do. They understood that when they targeted the 1619 Project, CRT, Black Studies, it was never just about targeting a few ideas, a few historical moments, or even a few legal scholars. It was about the entire effort to promote racial hierarchy as something natural and to generate all the consent that they needed to dismantle our institutions. Now, we call this the opening salvo in Redemption 2.0, just like what happened in the 19th century. It's a lurch to a post-democratic society that's to be run by the anointed ones, the wealthy, white men who presumably are naturally ordained to run this country. So once again, we are being led by those who would rather destroy this nation than to share it. And as was the case when that happened before, everybody suffers. So what began as attacks on Black knowledge, Black leadership, Black history, has now metastasized into the mass culling of women and minorities across the public and private sectors in the name of combating DEI. It's resulted in the gutting of billions of dollars of social safety net programs for working folks and the poor, and the dismantling of every significant, hard-fought gain on the road to a true multiracial democracy. This administration has shown us a lot of things, but one of the things that they've shown us the most is their vengeance against anti-racism is not confined just to us. Instead, it's been transformed into a nasty cancer that threatens the very heart of our democracy. So what is this moment telling us that we need to do? One of the things it's telling us is that we can't afford to ignore what's staring us in the face. That if we are unable to address the corrosive role that anti-Blackness has and continues to play in eroding our democracy, then we have no hope of saving it. For Black people, we know that the stakes for us are matters of life and death, and now it's time for the rest of the country to know that as well. Now, I want to be clear about something when I talk about anti-Blackness. To focus on anti-Blackness is not a claim that only Black people are suffering. It's not a claim that there aren't other dynamics or isms in place. So what I don't want to hear is, what about this? What about that? We're not saying that those things aren't playing a role. And it's also not a claim that once we address anti-Blackness, our work is done. We're not saying any of those things. But what we are saying is that there are particular dimensions of anti-Blackness, from its founding role in the Republic and the economy that was built around the theft of our labor, to the exploitation of Black people and the demonization of Blackness. All of these continue to permeate our culture and our politics. They've too often been ignored, and that ignoring has undermined our capacity to fight back. So now that we've agreed on what I'm not saying, I want to name 4 dimensions of anti-Blackness that we are going to be talking about. First, there's anti-Blackness and how racism against us is used to generate consent for the destruction of our democratic institutions that harms everyone else. So we've got to get the way that anti-Blackness is used to generate disappointment, upset, anger at our public education system, at our social safety net. Everything we can think about that's being destroyed starts with an assault on anti-Blackness. Second, there's anti-Blackness evident in the ways that our communities will be disproportionately impacted by this agenda. So we're going to talk about how some of the attacks on our democracy actually are going to harm us disproportionately. Third, there is anti-Blackness inherent in how this very moment is part of a greater cycle of reform and retrenchment. When I talked about the 19th century and the overthrow of Reconstruction, that is a historical cycle that's happening again right now in real time. We just heard about it from Texas. And finally, building on this, there is anti-Blackness, and I want to pause for a moment because this is a difficult one. There's anti-Blackness in the ways that our allies are silent about that very thing. So when I say I want to give you receipts, we want to leave here receipts, it's not really for the MAGA crowd. They know that this is about anti-Blackness. It's about our friends who are basically telling us we don't need to talk about that. It's too hard for us to generate support if we talk about that. We want to reclaim our democracy without talking about the dimensions of its destruction that have you at the center of it. So we're here to unpack all of this. We want to talk about how racism has been used to fuel the tyranny that is emanating from the White House. Now, this is a big, big journey that we're about to go on. And you know, whenever you're about to go on something that's serious, you want to surround yourself by your friends. And I am surrounded by my friends, my roadies, the people who are with me and have been with me through this entire moment. So first of all, please welcome Melanie Campbell, who is the president and CEO of the National Coalition of Black Civic Participation and convener of the Black Women's Roundtable. Welcome, welcome, Melanie. Second is Lisa Coleman, the first female and first Black president of Adler University. Lisa is the former inaugural senior vice president for global inclusion and strategic innovation at NYU. Welcome, Lisa. And Evelyn Hammonds, who is the Barbara Gutman Rosencrantz Professor of the History of Science and a professor of African and African American Studies and a former dean of Harvard College. Welcome, Evelyn. And last and not least, you've heard her voice, Dr. Kaye Whitehead is the host of the award-winning radio show Today with Dr. Kaye. She's also, as you know, the president of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Come on back, Kaye. All right, my friends, my sister girls, thank you so much for joining this conversation. So they all know, you all might not, we do these conversations in rounds. And they're conversations, they're not just panel speeches. So we're gonna be engaging each other. And what I'm gonna do in these rounds is talk about each of these dimensions of anti-Blackness that I introduced. So again, you can have receipts about what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to start with the historical part, and in particular focus on the race retrenchment dimension that I talked about. And of course, that means I'm going to the president of ASALH first. So you're now the steward of the organization that Carter G. Woodson began. You are holding that baton. I want to bring forward one of the quotes from Dr. Woodson in his most famous book, The Miseducation of the Negro. He writes that white supremacy rewrites history to paint a false picture of white superiority and black enslavability. And since then, black people have created entire fields of knowledge to disrupt all of those assumptions. Now, as you know, this rings exceptionally true to us at AAPF because we've been sounding the alarm bells about this since they mounted a campaign to demonize critical race theory and intersectionality back in 2020. And then people who we were calling into the fight were saying things like, oh, that's just a distraction. Oh, there's bigger fish to fry. What's at stake with attacking ideas? So I want us to think now about the lengths that this administration has gone to since our perspectives have been outlawed, our knowledge has been erased, our memory has been attacked. Can you name some of the sites where you've seen this process continue and connect it to the larger project of writing us out of American history?
Thank you so much, Professor Crenshaw, and it's a pleasure to be up here with you and these esteemed scholars, my sister scholars, so I appreciate that. I want to go back to go forward, because I think when we look at the long arm of history, we have to help people understand that what we're seeing today didn't just start today. That this is just the next natural step in the building of white supremacy in this country. When Dr. Carter G. Woodson founded the association in Chicago, it was 1915. We were in the midst of the nadir of African American history that started at the end of Reconstruction, and though some people are saying it has continued, we do mark the ending around 1940. It was during that time that the black community was in the midst of what I call a racial syndemic. We are all aware of a pandemic when one thing hits you at one time. A syndemic is when you have multiple pandemics coming toward a community. We were dealing with the ending of what was happening with all the advancements that had been made with Jim Crow. We were dealing with Jim Crow laws being risen up. We were dealing with lynchings at that time, on top of the grief and the despair within the black community with what was happening around this country. So as we were dealing with this, I don't think we talk enough about the ways in which we had to find survival mechanisms at that time. We had to find places to build community at that time. It's a brutal and bloody history of the American racial story. And part of the lies that are being told is you try to rewrite that history. You don't want people to sit with that history. We need to teach our children what Dr. Woodson said, and that's the mission of ASALH, to promote, to research, to preserve, to interpret, and disseminate information about black life, about black history, and about black culture. When Dr. Carter G. Woodson launched Negro History Week, it actually wasn't for the entire world. And sometimes people get this mistaken. Because there are all kind of cartoons, oh, Black History Month is for them, not for us. No, Carter G. Woodson said we need Negro History Week so we can teach our children about the richness of who they are. We need to make sure that our children have the weapons that they need to be able to fight in this society, and they only get the weapons by knowing their history. That's why we have to teach them that they're more than just a footnote in American history. I also go, Professor Crenshaw, to Mary McLeod Bethune. And Mary McLeod Bethune, in addition, of course, to launching the National Council of Negro Women, Mary McLeod Bethune belonged to ASALH first, because she's our first woman president of ASALH. And she was often referred to as the first lady of Negro America. She talked about being a gardener. And she said, as parents and as teachers, we have to plant seeds in our children to help them bring order out of the chaos that we see around us. We are in a chaotic moment. We're watching as the National Park Service, which owns many of our historic homes, the Carter G. Woodson home, the Bethune home, Frederick Douglass's home. They are now being threatened. They are now losing staff, and we're losing funding that helps to build up these places. We saw the attack on our beloved Blacksonian, and many of us were out there marching in the streets saying, hands off our history, trying to remind the world that when they go after our textual and material lineage, what they're seeking to do is number our days in the historical record. And we have to make sure that's not going to happen. I end with this. I think we have to do the hard work to remind the world that it's not just enough to say hands off our history if you're not willing to go out and put your body on the line to protect our history. It's not just enough to say they should create freedom schools if you're not using every space you have. Now, there are a number of places in Baltimore where I'm kind of banned, because wherever I go, if there's a line, then I'm going to teach Black history. So I'm saying, you know, give me my grande, and did you know about Mary McLeod Bethune? And for people like Dr. Kaye, stop turning every space, but that's what we should do, turn every space into a space for a freedom school. We have to remind America that our history is not written in pencil, it's written in pen. And we have to have these hard conversations so people are forced to remember.
Thank you, Kaye. And you know, you all saw some of the images of our May 3rd action to defend the Blacksonian. I always have to take a moment and say, these two sisters at the end here, they led the march with me. One of them decided that we were going to have some drums, so she brought a drum line, and the other one started to, well, why are we marching? We need to dance. So hundreds of people were dancing around the Smithsonian. Now that is a Black protest right there, right? That is part of our culture. So Kaye, I want you to hold the mic for one more moment, and I want to bring Toni Morrison into this conversation. Now, Toni Morrison gave a famous speech now that more people are discovering, where she talks about the steps toward the descent into fascism, and one of the things that she says is that you create a pariah class. And you marshal resources, literary and others, to sustain this pariah class. You tell a story about them that generates consent for their treatment. And once that treatment is consented to, then it becomes standard treatment for everybody else. So what can you tell us about how this process is unfolding right now, and why everybody needs to be aware and care and activated by what they're seeing?
Thank you for that, because we know that in order for white mediocrity to be rewritten and taught as white superiority, then they have to erase and dismantle the stories of Black excellence. From music to poetry, art to literature. And I'm not just talking about the writer and the artist that we lift up. I'm talking about the creativity that just comes from the Black experience wherever we move. I'm talking from the way we walk to the way we talk, the way we speak with our eyes without saying a word. You know when sisters get together, Sometimes all you need is a twist of the head, and you know exactly what I'm saying. That's the creativity. Like there's sometimes a shock nature that Black folks are surviving and thriving. We are crying and we are laughing. We are moving and we are growing, that we find spaces to create excellence, and that we cannot let our children forget that. You brought up Toni Morrison, Professor Crenshaw. I want to just mention about the white gaze, which we know is loosely coming from when W.B. Du Bois talked about double consciousness. Because Du Bois talked about that sense of always looking at ourselves through the eyes of others. Toni took it a step farther. She said the real problem for Black people is white people, because we have come to believe that we are nothing unless they are defining us. We are nothing unless we're matched against them. I think we got to turn that a little bit, and I love Sister Morrison. I think we got to talk about the Black gaze. Because I do believe that there's something in the psychosis of whiteness and white supremacy that everything we do has to be dismantled so they can exist. That's that idea that King said, that a man can only ride your back when you're bending over. That there's something that happens when Black folks stand up tall. Now, I don't spend a lot of time studying the psychosis of whiteness, but I will say in this moment that if you look at the diversity and the equity and inclusion in this country, and then you watch someone spend an inordinate amount of time trying to tear this down, trying to replace the truth with lies, trying to erase us, you understand that they are rejecting truth in favor of their own opinion. They are rejecting the facts in favor of lies. Dr. King, in his last speech, Professor Crenshaw, the last sermon that they killed him before he could give, and that sermon was entitled, "Why America Might Go to Hell." He said, if America does not remove itself from the racial and economic path it's on, it is on its way to hell. Well, J20, I think, was a sign that we're already there. And so the question is, how do we get out of it?
Dr. Kaye, thank you. So I want to go to our third theme, race reform and retrenchment, and direct this to my scientist friend. You know, you always need to have that friend who can explain things that you just do not understand. I was never a math, science, I didn't get any of that stuff, but this one right here will break it down for you. So I want you to break something down. So you served for 2 terms as the Obama administration's on the board of oversight for the National Science Foundation. And in that capacity and in your work, you've seen progress being made to grapple with scientific racism. Now we're in a different moment where the Trump administration has adopted, to say it likely, a radically regressive stance about race and science. Now, part of me is not particularly surprised. They told us in 900 pages, that's right, you know, called Project 2025, all the things that they were intending to dismantle, right? So holding the line against scientific racism was one of the things that they were going to dismantle. But there is also a part of me that is shocked about how quickly the reemergence of this scientific racism, how quickly and how deeply it's happened. So the executive order against the Smithsonian, for example, indicts it for, let me see how they put it, an improper ideology. And the improper ideology is the idea that race is not natural. The improper ideology is race is constructed. The improper ideology is that if race is not natural, then racial inequality is not natural. All of that is an improper ideology. And in case they think we didn't hear them when they said it, when they purged all the books from Annapolis, the Naval Academy, they took out I Know Why the Caged Birds Sing. They took out how racism takes place. They left in the bell curve. Yeah, they left in Mein Kampf, right? So this proper ideology seems to be embracing this idea of scientific racism. So give us some receipts about how this is is retrenchment. We're going back to a period of time where science was mobilized to support white supremacy.
Thank you, Kim. So good evening. I'm glad to be here with you all this evening. And Kim is raising, I think, a really, really important set of questions. And I want to start trying to explain one thing. Scientific racism never went away. So, I mean, those of us who studied science, who worked on building programs to increase the numbers of African Americans and other people of color in the scientific and engineering and technology and medical workforce, have been fighting an uphill battle for at least 50 years, if not more. And so, but we started making some inroads. We started making a little bit of progress. It's been too incremental, and that's something we should not do again. But we never really broke through the kinds of barriers that have been deeply embedded in the scientific enterprise in this country from its origins. So I want to start by making some remarks about that with what I do in my class. I teach a class called The Changing Concept of Race in America from Jefferson to Genomics, because I want to start with Jefferson and end up with genomics. It's a long arc, but the first thing I do with my students, I say, so what is race? Everybody raises their hand. It's a social construction. And what kind of social construction is it? And they start telling me about hair curl, eye shape, nose shape, differential susceptibility to disease. I said, those are social things? You know, who can run fast, what group can run fast in track, all this kind of stuff. I'm like, that's not social. Then you're talking about biological and physical characteristics and differences. So how is it a social construction? That piece is very difficult for Americans to get a hold of, because we live in this racialized society where the natural and the social continue to be conflated all the time, and race is one of the major ways it happens. And so I can tell you before I go on, the end of part of that story is, and then I ask the students that in the last day of class, and some of them say, you've made this so hard, Professor Hammonds. I don't know. I have no idea. And I go, okay, we'll try again next year. But it is a very difficult thing to hold on to. And so what we really do need this history of this link between science and the ways in which science, from the beginning of the Republic, was tied to the properties that were supposedly about black people that were naturalized. Jefferson writes in Notes of the State of Virginia, the kinds of differences we see among these black people, they can't be citizens because they are different from us, and it comes from nature. Those differences are given to us by nature. They are innate, and they cannot be changed. So black people have different susceptibility to pain, feel pain differently. He went through a whole long and really difficult list of things that made black bodies different from white bodies, that made those black bodies unfit for citizenship in this country. And you don't have to get upset about it, he's basically saying, because it's given by nature. We didn't do this.
God did it.
God did it. It was given by nature. It's innate, and it's not going to change. So we go forward from the 18th century into the 19th century. More and more observers, these natural philosophers who become scientists, continue to probe that question. Well, how are their ears different? How is their nose different? How is it that a few of them get yellow fever? But and while the black people were dying around them of yellow fever. So we have this constant comparison of black bodies and white bodies, and whose body is always the deficient body? The body that can't be responsible for leading anything in this country, only fit for slavery, for work, for certain kinds of labor. This goes forward in time. And so without knowing that history, I can still have students in the 21st century look at me and they don't know what race is. They couldn't define it walking in the classroom if their lives depended on it. But if they can't do it, then how are we going to undo what is just happening?
And yeah, see, this is what I mean, my scientific friend. And just to then put the gloss of critical race theory on top of it, what we bring to the table is the way the law basically authorize that stuff. So you have your scientists saying black people are unfit for freedom, and you have the Supreme Court saying, yeah, and the Constitution backs that up because they were enslaved. What we did to them is a feature of who they are. So even the black person who's not a slave, or even those of us after slave, we are never fit for freedom because of the enslavability. What was done to us becomes a natural feature of who we are, right? So this knowledge together is part of what critical thinking about race actually is. It's also the thing that they don't want us to do anymore. So let's take it to the differential and disparate consequences of this resurgence of scientific racism and marry it with the attack on DEI. So now in the name of anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion, I always like to say that because I want people to have to defend being opposed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Tell me the line of argument against these values. But in the name of it, this administration has gone after grants to better understand maternal mortality, algorithms that undermine black folks' access to particular kinds of treatment, programs that are meant to protect African American communities from the kind of toxic exposure that happens because of the politics of putting toxic substances next to where we live. So all of these are concrete things that are happening on one hand. On the other hand, if you look about how these things are talked about, how DEI is framed, they'll tell you this is a culture war to make you think that people aren't dying because of it, to make you think that all you have to do is ignore it and it's not going to bite you. So help us take forward from this all the ways in which the costs of this attack on science, on access, in the name of DEI, is not simply a culture war. This is the road towards creating a pariah class that has no power, that is being impacted, and eventually this impact will affect everyone.
So I think we have to start reading against the grain of what we're being told every day. It's one of the things we must do. So when they decided to, in this last horrible eight-month period, and they started shutting down pieces of the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, and other aspects of government agencies, particularly those that were involved in health and science. With respect to health, one of the first directorates they closed was the National Minority Health and Health Disparities. That's one of the first. Why would they close that at first? But that's because that's the place where over time, many African American researchers and people who were concerned about the deep-seated racism that still existed in the medical enterprise and were starting to do a lot more rigorous, quantitative, stellar work on trying to solve the problems of black people's health. That's where a lot of them got grants from. So that's the one you shut down first. Okay, so again, you can then tell the story that seems more comfortable to Americans. Well, black people die because they're black people, not because of the environment. And of course, I always say the father of health disparities work is W.E.B. Du Bois. He writes the Philadelphia Negro. He writes the health and physique of the Negro American all at the turn of the century, of the 20th century. And he was one of the first people to say, you keep saying black people have these inherent deficiencies, right? We die of higher rates of tuberculosis than anybody else. But we notice in Chicago, we're looking at these immigrants who are working in the stockyards, and they have higher rates of tuberculosis than we do. So is it race? Or is it working in the stockyards? I mean, is there some other set of issues here that are not being seen by these so-called disinterested scientific observers? So that's when I said earlier, scientific racism hasn't gone anywhere, but it has been consistently contested over the last century to now, and we were making some real inroads. More black professionals in the scientific fields, programs to support them, but we still were not getting above 9% of black people in the scientific and technical workforce. So we weren't breaking down a whole lot of doors, but the ones we did break down have been significant and important. But now, when you flip the script and go back to, this is all natural, this is all some inherent inability of black people to live in civilization, which was a common refrain. And even in Science magazine, not 2 weeks ago, a scientist said, I don't understand why we're having to shut down our medical programs and research programs because of DEI. There's no bias in science. There's no bias in medical. I don't know what these people are talking about, right? And so that persistent belief that Du Bois called out in 1939 in his paper on the Negro scientists, he said, there seems to be some people who think that black people do not have the quantitative habits of mind to do science, even though he had met lots of black people who were trying to be science in the 1930s. Okay, so we've been pushing at these barriers, these challenges, these ways in which we cannot do the work that we have talent for in our communities. People, in a democracy, in a real one, if you have the ability to do science, you ought to be able to do it. If you have the talent to do math, you ought to be able to do it. Right. But that has not been the case for our people in this place.
Yeah. And that's why it's so important to them to naturalize the inequality. If they can say that the inequality is a product of who we are, then not only is there's not an imperative to change it, your effort to change it is seen as preferential treatment, absolutely, reverse discrimination, something illegitimate. So on the question of reverse discrimination, preferential treatment, and universities, I'm going to come to you, Lisa. And all right, so let me just say, y'all know I teach at Columbia University, and Columbia is in some ways on the front line, I'm going to say it, bending the knee to authoritarianism. I can't call it anything else but that. So in the details of the bending the knee, there is the agreement to turn over data about admissions. There is the agreement to allow these monitors to oversee some of the departments, right? So we're talking about a wholesale attack on the university's autonomy and independence as we know it. So this is another thing. I wasn't surprised that they came after it, but I was surprised at how completely any resistance to it actually collapsed. So now we're in the aftermath of the collapse, and I really want to talk about what that means for black folk. Now, one of the things we know is that in the aftermath of SFFA, that's the anti-affirmative action Harvard case, we saw numbers of African Americans plummet in some of the more elite programs to levels that we haven't seen since 1960s. Yes. So we are talking about retrenchment. I want to be clear about this. I'm not exaggerating when I'm talking about the effort to really push us back. And so I want you to comment on how universities and university officials have now been deputized into being agents of resegregation, right? How is this happening?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Professor Crenshaw, for setting this up. So let's talk a little bit about education first. I think that's, because to piggyback on the history and then thinking about scientific racism, education, even pre-Board, Brown versus Board, black people were not wanted in the educational systems. So let's first be honest about that. Educational systems were set up for white elite landowners, and that was the preferential treatment in terms of thinking about who would have access to education. Then we have cases in jurisprudence and law that, all the way up to Brown versus Board. But what we know is that this idea of knowledge production, which goes back to scientific racism and who owns knowledge. Well, I have worked as a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer for 30 years at 3 different fairly elite institutions prior to becoming a president. And what I would like to say about those experiences are that knowledge production has always assumed to be owned by an elite class. An elite class of institutions, an elite class of people, and that production of knowledge, right, is this reification of whiteness. So as we're kind of unpacking, and as you're talking about the resegregation, I would say, yes, there's a resegregation, but I'm not ever sure it was integrated. I think you had parallel tracks in many of these predominantly white institutions, right? And those tracks meant that you had some people, and we can talk about allies in a second, but, or not.
All right.
And so you have these tracks, and the way those tracks then kind of mirror this idea of progression. But they really are tracks. And literally in K through 12, you have tracks, right? Like there are tracks. So again, I think to unpack the idea of education and then these hierarchies, they continue to not only exist, but as Evelyn was speaking, there is no rupture in science, in the sciences, right? I wrote a paper about 20 years ago with a colleague, and it had to do with a White House report. It was at the beginning of, it was at the end of the Clinton administration. And I guess I was longer than 20 years ago, I'm old. But we wrote a paper, and we were looking at what was talked about. There was a report about the evolution of education. It was a White House report. The Obama administration picks it up, blah, blah, blah. But what they were predicting is that higher education would shift. You were seeing more people of color come into higher ed. And we saw no shift. We didn't see shifts in leadership. We didn't see shifts in the kind of ways in which higher education was being done. So I'm going to end these comments by saying just a couple of things, because when you look at this resegregation, and particularly the attack on endowments, research, and loans, right? It's the trifecta. Loans are directly about Black people. Okay, make no mistake about that. That is very much about Pell Grants, and that is about private loans. Black people do not get private loans at the same rates. They do not have the same resources to leverage homes, et cetera. So loans. Second, research. And I'm not going to go into research because Evelyn has covered at least the scientific part. But when you look at research and the attacks on research, it's particularly the research, and that's the knowledge production, right, to get rid of that knowledge. And then lastly, I do want to say this about endowments, because this is where the Black alumni groups, et cetera, are being attacked. And this is very important because endowments are something that when you look at the taxes, but then who's giving to endowments, et cetera, we were seeing the diversification of endowments in higher education. And this is a way to limit that diversification, thus, again, the reification of whiteness in higher education, and particularly then in who gets to produce and own the knowledge.
So let me follow. Yes, thank you. So I want to build on the connections that you're drawing out here, because you know, given the sort of moral panic about affirmative action that we have been looking at, you would think that we'd taken over the university, that we were absolutely everywhere. And so your description of like sort of dual tracks and your discussion about how, well, wait a minute, you know, some of this stuff, a lot of this stuff never went away. It does make us then think about, well, okay, so what was the panic about? And how do we understand the attack on the knowledge that we have produced? So I started with the attack on critical race theory, but of course, you know, right now there's an attack on programs. There's all of these reviews of various disciplines. In some states, there's the effort to completely eliminate disciplines. In AP African American Studies, I mean, that's where we kind of started the freedom to learn. There's a whole list of ideas that can no longer be taught in certain states, which is a product of our history and a product of our knowledge. So when we think about this attack, how do we put together the hollowing out of our presence and the hollowing out of the product of our presence, the things that we've done together? There's some people who actually theorize that you define meritocracy by the absence of us being it, or the reverse. If we are there, they must not be doing things that are meritocratic.
Yes, so here is where I would say, and this goes back to something that was talked about earlier, this panic is through the articulation through a multifaceted approach. So literature, art, science, labor, education. You attack all of those and you create panic. Right? So you create this panic through these systems. So the educational system is broken. Knowledge production is broken. Diversity is taking over. Woke is taking over, right? And what is happening is we're producing this literature that is making all these people and keeping other people down. People can't get jobs. Certain people immigrants are only getting jobs, right? So you have this new, relatively nuanced, but yet flat, right? Overlay of these issues, and that produces a kind of panic, right? Now, I do want to also be particular because I think there is another kind of panic, and it has to do with the way in which you create, when war is happening, who do you attack? Women. Oh, yes, okay. You got something to say, people got something to say. Okay, so during war, right, what you do is you tear down women. This can happen through rape, this can happen through education, it can happen through a number of different ways. If we look at what happened in the Kamala Harris election and the ways in which she was demonized on her knees, all of these kinds of images, right? And then we think about black women as being what was being talked about, black girl magic, right? Every time I heard it, I was like, uh-oh. Right, and then black women being the most educated, right? Well, the backlash to that, right, and the panic that you're talking about is what will that mean, right? So there's this hyperbole that then we are taking over higher education, right? We're taking over the labor markets, taking over government, good government jobs, right? So those are the ways that you instill that kind of panic through a multifaceted, right, discourse. And then that panic then ensues, and you say, okay, now we want to pull all of these things back. I could wax poetic about this, but the only other thing that I will say about this particular attack on black women is then you get to the generations. And that is really crucial, because now you're talking about the attack on generations to come. So if 300,000 black women lose their jobs, what does that mean for our future? For the children, for all of those pieces, elder care, right, all of these pieces. And so when we think about this knowledge production, the knowledge is produced that the threat, who is the threat? Right, and this, I'll end here, gets to our allies.
You can continue on that.
So when we're talking about allies and talking about who's going to be the allies, I have been interested in who has stood up for black women, who has not. I do not see a plan to hire 330,000 people. I don't see a plan to hire 30,000. But I do see requests for us to get on the front lines, right, in front of others who perhaps voted for this. And so as I think about the ways in which we need to reframe, I spend a lot of time reading history as well, and so I'm interested in the youth. It's why I stay in higher education. And so as I think about the Underground Railroad, I think that's what we need. And we need to think about that Underground Railroad in a different way now. I know you're going to ask us a question about this later, but I do think that when we think about the people who helped to lead that, and this is no discounting of the men who were deeply involved in that, but I bring it back to war because the people who are the most vulnerable in war, and that's what we are at war, are women and children. And so how do we reconfigure and think about how we lead and move forward across, perhaps, allies, but how do we recreate those Underground Railroads, because we are very vulnerable and at risk.
Thank you.
Can I just say one point about this? 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 Can I just say So the other thing I said earlier, we spent, many of us in the sciences and engineering and medicine, have spent a lot of time trying to bring more African Americans into these fields. At the same time, we want to do that because we want to develop the talent that we have, right, to do this kind of work, but also to bring that talent to bear on problems in our communities, right, that have been ignored. But then you have institutions that support STEM education, but don't let them take a humanities course.
Right.
Don't let engineers take a literature course. Don't let them take sociology, because then they might start talking about.
They might learn something.
They might learn something.
yes.
Don't. Oh, we want more. We want more to do. More of our folks to do computer science, but not at the highest level, not at the PhD level. We want to understand because their argument is, then we will not. We won't just be the users of the technology that is shaping our world. That's all we can be. We can't be creators.
Yes.
We can't turn that in. And so that part of the educational enterprise, it doesn't have to be that engineering students don't have to take that. It's a decision not to have them take history, sociology, anthropology, learn about the social problems that their techniques and talents should help us solve. So if they don't have to learn it, they don't value it. And then you can unleash a whole lot of 23-year-old intro to computer science graduates to tear down the government. And they don't think it's a bad thing.
Just like that, just like that. So, Melanie, I want to come to you and talk about a parallel to what we're talking about in the university. So, we just talked a little bit about Kamala Harris, and let me put it this way. It seems like too often the labor of black women is taken for granted. The labor of black women is mobilized to give other people what they want. The labor of black women is used to put people in positions to govern, but not us to be the governors. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what happened in 2024 when 107 days to the election, Kamala Harris was put in a position that was untoward. Black women were asked to carry it, and black women did carry it. Black women were asked to make the right choice for democracy. We did. We got a 92%. That's an A in my book. And we did this under immense pressure, stresses, but without immense resources. Right. So can you paint a picture of what it's like, what it was like for black women on the ground carrying this weight, mobilizing people, but once again doing it without the resources and without the support that was warranted given how important black women's voting is to this democracy?
Come on, Melanie.
Okay. Really, Kim? I thought you were my sorrow and my friend. But I do have to, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I am a bit jet lagged. As I told you, I've been through 3 flights to get here today, but God is good. In order to answer that question, you know, they always say, with all these historians and scholars here, I'm an organizer first. Mm-hmm. And understanding what happened with this last election, we have to remind ourselves more than anything, first of all, that we were winning, which is why we're going through this. But you have to go back to the Obama election because black women turned it out. Young people turned it out. Black men, maybe not at the rate, turned it out. Be very clear. And so we're living that backlash.
Yeah.
The other thing that took place prior to Kamala Harris being in that position was that we also had decided as black women that we were not going to continue. I love, worked hard, like a lot of us in this room, to help get President Obama elected twice. But one of the things we wanted was a black woman on the Supreme Court. We did not get that. Yes. And so we decided that we were not going to allow another Democrat quite frankly, because that's who, at least halfway, or partially, third of the way, dealing with the issues that we care about, that we were going to make our demands. If you want our vote, right, then when the last Democratic president, Biden, ran, we're like, black woman. Of course it's going to be. You said a woman? Oh, we know it's going to be a black woman. And we also said we wanted to have that Supreme Court position that we have now. And so there's backlash from that, and we know that. And so understanding the political dynamics when it comes to black political power, the role black women play, we drive that vote because we are the ones who influence all of our significant others in our families. The other reality that, to get to the question at hand, when then Vice President Harris was put in this position, the black women, quite frankly, didn't want her to have to be in that position. Most black women were saying, y'all need to leave this alone. And if they had listened, we might be having a different conversation today. But those who are allies, who know the most intelligent amongst intelligence, which are white, male, mostly consultants who get paid whether they win or lose, controlled that and have always controlled that apparatus. And then we find ourselves in this mess. So as we find ourselves in this mess, I do want us to figure out, well, what the hell are we going to do about it?
Yes.
Because we're in a position now where, as we've heard from our awesome sisters here, history has already taught us, how we got here. The question we have to ask ourselves is how are we going to get out of this mess? While we're trying to figure that out, I want us, while we're sitting, I'm here with one of my mentors, Mrs. Cora Masters-Berry, political scientist in the back room, along with my family, Reverend Dr. Judith Moore, and my brother, Isaac Campbell. We road dogged it. We haven't even had a chance to stop. That we have to figure out how we're going to take care of our people. While this is not going to be fixed by one election, but with all of the wealth and all of that took for all of us to get here, and I'm not disparaging anybody, but what Texas is doing, we got to do more of that. Yes. We have to figure out strategies that work. Our young people want to see us do something, and they will do something. I've participated in the State of the People Power tour with Angela Rye and a bunch of us, and many of us in this room and others, because we have to also provide the resources that are now not going to be there. Right. This ugly bill is already having impact. Don't think that people aren't losing their Medicare now, or their Medicaid or and other things, and students are in trouble. So we have to fill those gaps. And understanding history says what? We have to have some self-determination in this strategy while we figure out how to organize ourselves from a political standpoint. And she told me I have to stop, so I'll stop.
I'm going to give you the mic back again, Melanie, because we never tire of hearing, from what you see on the ground. We talked about the 300,000 lost jobs, black women's jobs. And I don't know about you, but I see it quoted, but not a sense of urgency about what that means, not a sense of crises or disaster, just like, oh, yeah, we have 300,000 black women and counting. And so what this reminded me of is what happened when Woodrow Wilson came to power. Yes. And he completely resegregated the federal bureaucracy, and resegregated makes it seem like he just, put the black people over here and the white. No, black people lost their jobs. And it impacted generations. There was just a recent study that shows what it did to homeownership, what it did across generations, how much we lost by that federal policy that pushed black people down and out. So when you think about the long-term consequences of this moment, what do you see? What do you worry? What do you want people to know so they're not sitting on this and saying, oh yeah, 300,000 people?
Well, again, that history, right? So I think it's an opportunity. We've been talking about this. It's an opportunity for us to reimagine what we want to see. Can we be real? We're already in trouble, right? In this country, it's never fully been this democracy for all of us. So as they have this regime, because that's what it is, has totally destroying this country, this democracy, what do we want to see? It gives us an opportunity to also reimagine what that looks like. At the same time, I'm going to say it again, we have to take care of our people while we're dealing with that. Right now, as we're sitting here, this regime is getting ready to take over the nation's capital, right? Right. What you saw in LA and other places, and said, well, that's just the immigrants as if they're not black immigrants, is now getting ready to happen to black people. And you mentioned to my sister, those of us who would be out here in these streets, we knew better. But it doesn't mean we were sitting on our, well, for a minute I sat on the side. Yeah, I did. I sat down for a minute, for about 30 days maybe. I was pissed off. I was just lying about that. Very pissed off. Highest passivity. Gotta laugh to keep from crying.
Yes, you do.
Right, so we have to just take this moment and just, I'm gonna say this and then stop it. I don't know if we're gonna have questions from the floor or not, but we just have to figure out how we win in this moment and understand that in this moment we're also planning for those that's not in this room. We're planning for those who have not yet been born yet.
Yes.
That's what history has taught us from
Yes.
the first Reconstruction to the second Reconstruction, and we have to imagine what does the third Reconstruction look like, because that's where we are. We're in this historic place. I think from the 1800s. What do we want to see our children inherit? And Susan, we just saw Susan Taylor. She was leaving and said, "What do you want? What do I want to say when I'm no longer on this earth? What is my dash going to mean?" And that's where we are. But I know the God I serve not leave us wanting. We just got to do what we have to do, and we will fight, and we will win.
And just so everybody is clear, can you describe what's happening in Washington, D.C.? What this takeover looks like?
So takeover looks like, or takeover is that the current occupant of the White House, because there was an incident, a violent incident, don't get me wrong, where a Doge worker was attacked, that somehow Washington, D.C. is so crime-ridden that they need to now call in the National Guard. So imagine that. Anybody know Washington, D.C.? I grew up there. All right. So imagine Anacostia, Cora, Southeast, already showed up, and correct? They're already there. He hadn't even gotten on TV tomorrow. So be real clear where this is attempting to go. And I was in Fort Lauderdale yesterday with the National Black Law Enforcement Executives in a town hall meeting. And we were talking about how critical it is that we figure out how local law enforcement, where we have some element of control, is going to need to be a buffer for us. Because we saw what happened in California, and they are chopping at the bit. There is no, unfortunately, there is no revolution without bloodshed. But they're trying to take it somewhere else. And so that's the concern that I know many of us have hard to sleep at night. But again, we have to hold on to our faith that God is protecting us, because he protected our ancestors. So understanding that, and then have the courage to know there's nothing wrong with being afraid, right? But don't let fear overtake us. And understanding that we have to, if we want our children to have a shot at all now, our mother was a public school teacher. I mentioned that, right? So just knowing coming up how that affected lives and those, so children now are coming up and they won't know who they are. So if you don't know who you are, you don't even know what's coming at you.
Thank you, Melanie. Kaye, I want to come back to you, and this, I think, particularly falls in line with what Melanie was just talking about. So we've known for a while that this administration was going to be different than the Trump 1.0. And we saw him doing things in real time that I think were difficult for people to actually grapple with what's happening. So we saw him remove black folk from the military, right? We saw him do that. Now, if he's removing them, there's a reason why he's doing that. We see them shuttering the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. We see them clamping on freedom of the press. Now, from what we know about authoritarianism, what we know about fascism, what we know about creating a pariah class is you set these things up in order to execute exactly what you're planning to, without dissent, without people being able to understand, without people being able to organize and mobilize. So this is a slow-moving train wreck. Now, you're one of the few voices out there. You're one of the few black women out there. And we've seen others, you know, lose their position. Karen Attiah is the only black opinion writer left at the Washington Post. The only one left. We saw what happened to Joy Reid. More broadly, we see in Los Angeles how black women were just pushed out of their DEI. So something is happening. The silence is happening everywhere. What do you want to know what do you want people to know about these attacks on the media, the attacks on our ability to speak our reality, and how important it is for us to have these voices, independent voices, to fight against this anti-blackness?
Thank you. Actually, been waiting for this question because this is the one that I'm wrestling with. Professor Crenshaw mentioned earlier that I host the award-winning show Today with Dr. Kaye. I'm one of only 2 black women in the country to solo host a drive time radio show. When I started 7 years ago, there were 6 of us. Now it's 2. And the one that is on the West Coast, my sister has already been saying they've been shortening her hour. The reason is because drive time radio is the most powerful time on the radio, because you can get 3 generations in the car who are going home. You get the baby in the car, you get mama in the car, you get grandma. So you can hit 3 generations every single day. My show has been extended. We were planning for what Trump is doing in terms of going after public radio. I've been following Project 2025, and so we made the decision last summer to extend the show from 2 hours to 3 hours. I said we need to really dig down into public radio. So our time is from 3 to 6, and we are the highest listening show in terms of our ratings on the East Coast. So Today with Dr. Kaye pulls a very large audience. We also know that we're very vulnerable. We are at Morgan State University at WEAA, but because we have turned our entire show into preparing people to practice daily small acts of resistance, our fund drives over the last year have been about resistance work. I'm like, you don't have to tell me what you love. Show me your paycheck and what you spend it on, and I know what you love. If you want the show to continue, we've got to stop relying on them to fund the show, and you have to do it. I said, you got to go back to, you give $5, you give $20. And so the challenge with that conversation was the sense, because they've canceled all talk shows on my station. I am the only talk show that is still on WEAA. And the reason is because they said, you know, black folks don't give money to talk shows. That's what I was told. I said, no, black folks give stuff that matters, stuff we believe in, stuff we want to continue. So let's turn the show into something that matters, that they love, and that they want to have continue. So we now are able to get our whole budget from our listeners. Because I said to them, this is the moment. Like, this is what you've been waiting for. So with that in mind, I have just 3 things I'd like to put on the table. One, with this 300,000 black women, I really want to know that people don't get the importance of that number. There are only 600,000 black people in Baltimore City as a whole. So imagine half of the people in Baltimore City losing their job. I don't think people are understanding it now. They will in September. When people start going back to school, when you come off vacation mind thingy, then people will really get the impact of how the black middle class has been decimated, because it was black women through these federal jobs holding up the black middle class. I also wonder, for those of us who have not lost their job, how many black women are now living in fear that I might be next. I don't want to put my neck out because I do need this income, and I understand that, except I believe that we're not going to be alive when the changes come. We might as well die, like Fannie Lou Hamer said, die standing up to 2 feet forward into freedom. We might as well do that kind of work. When it comes back to radio, which is my second point, we have here at AAPF, we had this novel idea around underground radio. We're like, every time we do something, let's do underground radio. We're passing the message from radio station to radio station so that we're all carrying the message as much as possible. Underground radio is gone because now they know that we're doing the work and they know what is happening. I think Trump callers they wait for my show at 1 o'clock because when the lines open at 3, it is nothing but Trump callers waiting. And as I tell them, that means you're actually a fan. You just don't know it. So why don't you fund the show? You listen every day, but they're clogging the airways. So we know that they're listening. We know they're taking notes. We know they're coming after us. But as I tell my listeners, if you fund us, then we will continue. The third point I'll make, and this is where I'll wrap up, is we have to study something that 47 did, which I think is a case study around fake news. When he first used the terminology fake news back in 2016, in less than a month, he used that little phrase 1,900 times on Twitter in 1 month. By the time we got to July of the following year, he had used it over 20,000 times. And then it began to get picked up. And when everything is fake news, where you're both calling it fake news and you're creating fake news, then people don't know what to believe. So you can fire the person giving out the labor statistics and say she's lying and she's manipulating the facts, even though they are the facts and coming from data. So now people don't trust the data because that's how fascism works. Jason Stanley talks about it in his book, How Fascism Works. He talks about the 10 things, and one of the pillars is around unreality, where you now believe the only thing coming from the person who puts himself in the center of the story. That's why public radio matters. Our job is we're supposed to cut through the noise and take these complicated issues and make them small for people. I will end by saying, when they gave me the mic 7 years ago, I said, I'm a professor of communication and African American studies. Why don't we just teach people the truth? And they'll just choose to listen. We had 3 callers last week I just want to know. We had an 8-year-old boy call and said, my mother is addicted to alcohol. Dr. Kaye, what can I do? I borrowed my mother's phone to call you, an 8-year-old. Later in the week, we had a 14-year-old call. Dr. Kaye, can you tell me where I can find Black history? And then on Friday, we had a 45-year-old woman calling and saying, because we were talking about abuse, sexual abuse, she's crying on the phone, saying, I've never told my story of being abused. In 1 week, from an 8-year-old to a 47-year-old, all on public radio, which is why that mic matters. The person that controls the mic can make sure the narrative stays true.
So Kaye has talked about the importance of the media, the independence of it. I want to get just a little snapshot of how the media were weaponized against Claudine Gay. I'll ask this to either one of you, but I think within a period of maybe a few days, there was something like 15, 16 stories in the New York Times about Claudine Gay.
Overall, something close to 200, more than any other
Insane.
Harvard president.
And more
Okay.
citations in
And
the
more
New York
citations.
Times than any other
So
president.
y'all are starting to take it up. And so let me add the rest of it. So when she was finally pushed out, a comment appeared by someone who had gone after critical race theory and DEI and then Claudine Gay, basically saying, we did this, and here's how we did it. We planted stories in the far-right media, like Fox and all the other stuff out there. And eventually, we could count on the mainstream media to pick it up and turn it into exactly what it was. We did it with critical race theory, and now we did it with Claudine, and now we're going to do it with DEI. So they basically said it, they did it, and they're continuing to do it. So strategy. Taking advantage, taking advantage of the unwillingness of our so-called allies to be critical, to be balanced, to actually be able to call this for what it is. So what is the moral of this story that we're learning, particularly the vulnerability of a black woman leader, the vulnerability of a black woman leader of that kind of institution, and the ambivalence of so many of our so-called liberal allies who were willing to play a role that was so utterly destructive?
Well, I think one of the things that they were successful at, Kim and Kaye, is that they put out a narrative that first could put a question mark over Claudine Gay's head. And therefore, then our liberal progressive allies, well, maybe, I mean, it's a terrible thing to plagiarize something. I don't know. And then they repeat that over and over. And my colleagues who knew her work well weren't saying anything. They claimed they were saying it to the right people, but it wasn't the big public narrative to defend her, because a question had arisen. Isn't there always a question mark over black women's heads? Isn't there always one? You can be the only one in the room, and there's still going to be a question mark over your head.
That's right.
Right? This is the person taking all the jobs away from us, question mark. Okay, so that to me was a failure of many people in the academy who refuse, which all of this revealed the ways in which critical race theory, African American studies, multicultural studies, and all of that had not really penetrated the academy in the way we thought it had.
That's right.
That people really did understand this, that American history and the explosion of social history and many more incredibly deep and rich histories that show the complicity of how this country has dealt with issues of race and leadership and at all levels. I mean, we now have fantastic histories. And people just kind of, well, I mean, maybe if she'd been perfect, right? I mean, I literally heard somebody say that if she'd been perfect. So the doubt moved over to her, and then followed by the kind of narrative that Kaye is talking about every day, all day, article after article, repeating the same stuff over and over and over again. Then what is left? Then it's like, well, I mean, after all that news, I mean, what choice was left?
How can she
you
be
not?
sustained? Yeah.
Well, there were a lot of choices left. There were a lot of choices left. There always are. And I also think that Project 2025 gave people, the people who launched it, implemented, I'm going to tell you, they executed beautifully. I got to give it to them.
Absolutely.
And so, but what it means is that we didn't have a Project 2025.
And still don't.
And still don't. So what are we executing about what we are not going to, we're not going to stop until we get it? That's what they did. And they got what they
And
wanted.
they had a long-term-
That made her staying
Yeah.
impossible.
So Lisa, I know you want to say something. I want to put a question to incorporate into what you're going to say, and then and then Melanie, and then Kaye's going to come out in the audience and play her role as the roving mic. So if you have some receipts to add to the conversation, get ready to do so. So here's what I want to put to you to integrate into your question, your answer. What's being said now is somewhat similar to what Evelyn just said. Well, how can we not? How can we sustain? So one of the arguments is, yes, Trump is shaking us down. Yes, he's making it costly for us to maintain, leadership, diversity, these programs. At the end of the day, it's in the good for the greater good for us to negotiate away all of these things. It brings to mind an allegory that the great Derek Bell wrote about. It was called The Space Traders, and if you haven't read it, go read it. And there's even a movie about it. And the whole point of it is that these people come from outer space and they say, we will let you solve all of your problems. We have all of the resources in the world. The only thing we want is your black people.
Your black people.
I love it.
And the assumption was, they're not going to go for that. Right? They're not going. And it turns out they do go for it. And they're helped in doing this by a black person who's willing to sell us all off in exchange for the greater good. Now, the beautiful thing is at the end, when he thought that the spaceship was going to take all the black people and he was going to get to stay, they say, oh, no, you too. You're getting on this ship as well. But I'm wondering whether Derek was prescient in that, because a lot of people are like, oh, Derek, that's too far. People, the values of diversity and equity, they're too deep. We believe in them too much. The universities are going to stay the course. Media is going to do the right thing, on and on and on. And yet it might be that we're looking at space traders in universities, in the media, and pretty much everywhere else. Does that make sense?
Yes. Absolutely, and that's absolutely correct. And when we're talking about people being disappeared, and even as we were talking, as Melanie's talking about what's happening in DC, right? All of these things are happening, and that's precisely right. You set up the conditions for disappearance.
Yeah.
You set up the fear for disappearance. You set it all up, and then the disappeared disappear. Right? And you set up all of these conditions around black women. You set up the conditions around labor, right? And then you have this disenfranchisement. You know where people are, staking out homes, staking out neighborhoods, right? And so that's exactly right. And I did want to add one other piece about allies. Because what happened, what Evelyn is talking about, right? There's the aperture of the university where you have the presidents and the managers, but no one wants to talk about these boards.
Yes.
And these boards are the same boards who are part of Project 2025. They are the same people who often orchestrate Supreme Court nominations and or not. And so as we pull back and think about strategies, I do think that we have to pull back when we're naming things, these boards, because the reality is the silence that continues is very much about then who gets disappeared. It's in that silence of those boards, the silence of who's actually doing some of that work as well. And I think that's really important, because when you look at the 9 institutions or beyond, right, and the billionaires at play and at war with each other, I think we really do have to unpack those boards and those supposed allies. Because those boards before, in 2020, were like, we need diversity. Right?
Yeah.
So to your point, they turned on a dime, but that's because they were always there.
Yeah.
They were always there. And that's part of the history.
And there are no consequences to them for turning on the dime, right?
That's right.
If we're not willing to make that costly, Why shouldn't they?
And because the structures weren't there, you asked me the question about hollowing out. Well, it's not, it is a hollowing out of Black studies, et cetera, but the holes were already there.
That's right.
So you just made the holes bigger.
Yes, yes. So Kaye's going to come down to the audience, but Melanie, go ahead and
Well, again, thank you, Kaye, and thank you for your team for inviting me. The thing that I think about, you know, in this moment, kind of still goes back to what are we going to do?
What are we going to do?
What are we going to do? And part of what we are not going to do is televise what we're going to do.
The Underground Railroad did not televise.
And also we have to educate our people, so we have to utilize forums like this to do that. And so, you know, for me and the organization that I lead, we've been doing a lot and working with you, Kim, and others, and every opportunity I get to be in a room where we can group think, right? And also remember that there is no movement without our young people, and then making sure that we provide those opportunities to support. If you can't go out there and get arrested, because I'm not right now. I'm not right now, right? But when there's time, when there is a time, there is no movement, there is no revolution without sacrifice. And we have to ask ourselves, what are we willing to sacrifice? We have to take care of ourselves, yes. We have to take care of our families, yes. We have to be strategic with our money, yes. That's what the Target showed us. In December, it'll be 70 years since the Montgomery boycott was started. So we have a roadmap. So let's just use it. And again, the revolution will not be on social media. And I apologize, but I do have to step away, Kim, okay? I love you all. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Melanie.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do like what Melanie said, that the revolution will not be on social media. It will not be televised, but it does have to be funded. And I think we do have to take that into account. We have to fund the organizations and the institutions that are doing the work that we agree with and that we believe in. Not just with thoughts and prayers. I say give your tithes and offerings to your church and come on and support the work we're doing here. We want to open it up for questions. We do have a mic here. I am going to roll as well. So we'll have you stand up, and I'll bring the mic over to you. You have a question, sir? We'll have you stand up. How are you?
Getting better. I wanted 3 points. I think that there are efforts afoot that are not televised. One of those efforts was started by a man who understands the boards, a man by the name of Vernon Jordan. Yeah. Do you remember Vernon? Vernon formed an organization called the Minority Corporate Counsel Association. Because what he figured out is the government is no longer going to be the it's the courts, which is why they took over the courts. Right? Hockey, skate to where the puck's gonna be, not where it is. So Vernon figured out if we change who's in the general counsel's office with women and people of color, then you have access to a very small place where everything goes through. All of it goes through there. So now, that organization, I was one of the founders of that organization, 1997, there are a bunch of people of color and women in general counsel's offices. There are a bunch of lawyers who came out of government into large law firms. We have the power now to play that game. 1. 2, there are no allies, there are frenemies.
Right.
There's no such thing as an ally.
you. Frenemies.
Right? Okay. So there are other people suffering. Those are the people that will be our frenemies. They will not stay forever, just as long. Okay? The last point I want to make is Carter G. Woodson wrote The Miseducation of the Negro. How long ago was that?
a century ago.
So
Yeah.
what he wrote is, we don't control our art, we will not control our future. Because our art controls our images. On this island last week, the people who were going to change this were here. The art, the film. The films are the message. They are the drum. That's the drum. Chandra Rhimes, Tracy Ross, Sharpton, they were all talking about controlling our images, funding our images. Mainstream media is no longer the factor, even for white people. It's been replaced. Guess what? We can do the same thing. So I do think there are a lot of things that's not televised. So there's more room for optimism. I do think we need to focus more on the arts, the films. They reach the kids. Fund them. In addition to this, you need Malcolm and Martin. That's the place. And it started on this island. The 23rd annual African American Film Festival with Message Films was here. And there were messages, Chandra Rhimes and them spoke. So I think that there are more things to be optimistic about.
No, thank you for that and putting that out there. And we know that the part of the work is making sure, we're going to ask people to step to the mic here, and I'll be here with you. And I will do the just a church gentle rub on your back to make sure that we can move the time along. I love dissertation and sermons, but we're going to just give you a little rub to move along and making sure that we can pull in our panel. We have all this knowledge in front of us. We want to make sure we're asking the questions as we're answering out.
That's
So please.
actually okay.
And that's okay.
We don't mind listening.
You don't mind listening at all.
Let me just remind folks that on the question of council, tomorrow we are going to have 5, count them, 5 Black state attorneys general. And they're going to talk precisely about the power that still exists to fight back. So join us, same time, same place, tomorrow.
And you can get the registration for that as you're walking out. Go ahead and get registered so you can be here on time, please.
My name is Dr. Valda Crowder. I'm an emergency medicine physician. I have a podcast called What the Health is Happening and a radio show on WOL. And I want to speak to the science and technology piece. I want to add a receipt and add a question. Adding a receipt, J. Marion Sims was an OBGYN doctor born in 1813 in South Carolina. I know you're shaking your head. He actually did surgeries on women. He developed the speculum, enslaved women without consent and without anesthesia. This is where the falsehood came of women, black women having, or black people having a higher tolerance for pain. He was the 12th president of the American Medical Association. So I just want to add that receipt. And if you could please speak to, you had a slide about the 5.6% African Americans that were physicians in the physician population. Could you please speak to the early 1900s when we had a higher percentage of black physicians in our community, and actually please speak on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc.
Can I?
I'll come up to you.
So just one short part of that. The Sims story is one of the most horrific stories in the history of American medicine, and he was lionized. There were more statues of him. There was a statue of him in Central Park. All kinds of stuff. But to the last part, in the early 20th century, one of the things that happened was a report that was commissioned by I'm gonna make a mistake, but to look at American medical education, and it resulted in the closing of many black medical schools. The only 2 that survived were Fisk and Meharry. Meharry and Howard. And that's right, Meharry and Howard. And again, that didn't have to be the only choice.
Right.
It didn't have to shut down the rest of them. There was an evaluation. They don't have the right equipment. They don't have the right curriculum. They don't have all these kinds of things, the right funding and support. It could have been, well, how about making collaborations between the very wealthy medical schools and the schools that are serving the population that you're not serving?
That's right.
How about that choice? There were many choices that people could make along the way instead of shutting them all down and therefore causing a moment of time where the numbers of black physicians began to decrease. And we've been fighting, as you would well know, to get back. And now the AAMC, the American Association of Medical Colleges, is a bit hamstrung now that they lost their DEI officer. So again, it's continuing. But thank you for that question.
Thank you for that. Yes, thank you so much.
consider what we are interested in is freedom.
Is what?
Freedom.
Yes.
Sandy Darity talks about social and economic freedom. And so I'm hearing you all to say, talking about our ancestors have led the way. Underground railroads. And I was speaking to a Spelman group, my Spelman sister here, back in April, you know, April is for us, that we have to have young people that are in these technologicals and social medias and listening and doing so that they can move us forward. We need our scholars. We have to have scholars. But we also need these young people, like the young lady that interrupted that process where they were gathering money for this racist that was killing people or something. Well, she called the black child an N-word. And so she interrupted that. So we need young people in these places and spaces. And so as we seek economic and social freedom, we don't need to study them. We study us. We are the original. We are the people who study money, they study the money. So we're not interested in studying them. We need to study us and how we do and move and how we actually are creative in the midst of every kind of structure and infrastructure that they placed upon us. So as we talked about, we rested. And I always write on social media, we're strategizing. We're not just resting. We're strategizing. We cannot get out there in the forefront. They will murder us. And as black women, we know we have been the force behind everything that has existed for us as people. And so I say to us, and to the scholars, we're asking you, how can we continue to strategize in using our young people, using our as scholars, and continue forward so that we are taking care of our future young people today?
I'd like to just follow up on that. Thank you. And I think this is, the revolution won't be televised. And one of the things that I've been interested in, I said this earlier about young people, but do people remember when there were the images of Elon Musk and Trump having sex? And they had to go around through the entire White House and unplug the televisions. Did people see this story? So they couldn't turn it off. Right? So there were images and they were superimposed and it was Elon Musk. Yeah, I see people's faces, so you didn't see it. But anyway, so they were having sex, okay? I saw this and I was like, who are those young people who did this? They had to go around and unplug every television. They could not shut it down. That's who we want. And they are part of our underground railroad, okay? Right? I went to Eritrea and I saw black children building computers from garbage, from scratch. So we need strategies and tools where we are reimagining the technology and the tools. And I often think about the movie Hidden Figures, right, with the black women. And so there are hidden figures. We just need to tap into them and then, right, think about that revolution in the underground spaces.
So we have time just for two more, and we'll end it here.
Hello, Dione Cespedes. I'm a founder of a financial education company called Soul Strivers. My question is, might it be possible that part of the solution for the 300,000 black women who have lost their job is for those of us in this room and outside of this room who control hiring, make a concerted effort to learn about the women who have been released and to find places within our organizations where they can be part of our own solutions?
I just met with a group of young women. I'm from the state of Ohio. And in Ohio, you've seen decimation of people and jobs at the intersection of healthcare and higher ed. So I actually flew there and met with about 50 young women who all have lost their jobs. And so part of counseling them to figure out next steps in terms of creating their own firms, et cetera, and then how we hire them. So I cannot say enough about that, but providing the mentorship and structure is the first part, because some of these young people, right, these are some of their first opportunities, et cetera. And then, right, I can say I've just hired two firms. So, so really thinking about then how do we enfranchise and create those structures. So thank you for that, because it's really important.
We want to thank you so much for your questions. We know we ran out of time. We want to continue the conversation. We are going to be open until 8 p.m. We do have some merchandise in the corner. We put those donor cards in your chair. As you're walking out, please stay in touch with us and find ways to connect. We will be here to have those discussions. Kim, I'll pass it over to you as we end the panel.
Yes, so thank you, everybody. I promised receipts. Did you get some? All right, so I want to thank our panelists, Evelyn Hammonds, Lisa Coleman, Melanie Campbell, and of course, Kaye Whitehead, for feeding us tonight.
And thank you, Kim. Thank you, Kim. Let's give Kim a round.
And if the folks from AAPF could just stand up and let people know who you are. It took a village to put this on, so thank you, everybody. And lastly, thank you all for coming and sharing this time with us. Kaye, back to you.
Yeah, so we just have to do a couple of wrap-up things before you walk out. I'd also like to ask if there are any members of ASALH, if you could please stand. I know we have the president of the Martha's Vineyard branch. Thank you, Ms. Thelma. We have Sylvia Cyrus. Thank you for ASALH. Thank you to our Dr. Deirdre Foreman and others. Thank you for coming out here.
And the polar bears.
And the polar bears, if we have the polar bears in the audience. Yes, there they are. Polar bears in the water. Thank you very much. I will say every year the polar bears come out and support us. We've been dipping in the water. If you haven't, I heard it is an amazing experience. Even spiritual is a word someone used. So let me give you just a couple of closing announcements so that everybody knows what is going on. Tomorrow, at 5 p.m., we're meeting back here. We are going to talk about preemptive alliances, Black attorneys general on the front lines for civil rights. We are excited to have, among others, Attorney General Letitia James, Attorney General Keith Ellison will be right here to have this conversation. Make sure you register. So you need to make sure you do that tonight before you leave. Get in on what's going to be discussed. Additionally, on Thursday at 2 p.m., we'll be at the Oak Bluffs Library from 2 to 4:30 p.m. for hashtag Say Her Name. A moment of memory, a moment of reflection. We want you to join us for that. We are just excited about everything we're doing this week. I told you in the beginning, it was part one of a three-part conversation. I believe part one has gone really well. I will know, when Kim talks about receipts, so my last word is about receipts. I will know that tonight has gone really well is if I show up at the coffee shop and people are talking about it. If I see you at the polar bears and you're talking about it. When you're getting your coffee from Mocha Mott's, you're talking about it. Take the information and share it. Encourage more people to be here tomorrow. I have a very good memory. I memorize all faces. I will see you back here tomorrow on time. Thank you so much for joining us.